My brother Dalton stood at our father's funeral, wearing Dad's Rolex while telling everyone how he'd carry on the family legacy. 2 hours later, he handed me a crumpled piece of paper with 4 words that would destroy everything he'd built. Check the storage unit. He had no idea Dad left me something worth more than the entire $60 million trucking empire he'd just stolen. The funeral home was packed that Tuesday morning. 300 people came to say goodbye to Wallace Harrington, the man who built a trucking empire from nothing. I sat in the front row with my wife Elena and our daughter Piper, watching my older brother Dalton work the room like he was at a business conference instead of our father's funeral. Wallace would have wanted us to celebrate his legacy, not mourn his passing, Dalton announced to a group of Dad's oldest business partners, his voice carrying that fake depth he used during board presentations. Harrington Freight Lines will continue to grow, I promise you that. He was already wearing Dad's Rolex. The man had been dead for 3 days, and Dalton had already raided his closet. The gold cufflinks Dad wore to every important meeting gleamed from my brother's French cuffs. Even Dad's lucky pen, the one he used to sign the contract for his first truck in 1979, poked out of Dalton's suit pocket. "Vulture," Elna whispered beside me, her hand tightening on mine. "Mom would have hated this," Piper added, her 16-year-old eyes sharp with disgust as she watched her uncle glad-hand another investor. She was right. Our mother Vera would have been appalled. But she'd been gone for 10 years now, taken by cancer when I was 28, and still trying to figure out my place in the family business. That was when I dropped out of college to help Dad keep things running. Dalton had been too busy getting his MBA to come home more than twice during her final months. The eulogy was the worst part. Dalton stood at that podium for 40 minutes, talking about vision and legacy and market expansion. He told stories about Dad that I'd never heard, probably because they weren't true. According to Dalton, our father was a ruthless businessman who taught him everything about conquering markets and crushing competition. The Wallace Harrington I knew taught me to change oil on a Peterbilt engine when I was 7. He showed me how to read a map without GPS, how to calculate fuel costs in my head, how to remember the names of every dispatcher's kids. But those stories didn't fit Dalton's narrative of corporate dominance. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. 2 minutes about the man who never missed my Little League games, even during the busy season. The father who taught me that knowing your drivers' names mattered more than knowing your stock prices. The man who built Harrington Freight Lines, not for glory, but because he loved the open road and wanted to share that with others. "Thank you, Bryce." The funeral director said when I finished, though I could see Dalton rolling his eyes from his seat. "Now, the family has requested that we proceed directly to the reading of the will." That's when everything changed. Vernon Pike, Dad's lawyer for 30 years, looked uncomfortable as we gathered in Dad's office an hour later. The space still smelled like his cologne and the peppermints he always kept in his desk drawer. Through the window, I could see our truck yard. 200 vehicles that had carried everything from furniture to medical supplies across 12 states. "This is highly unusual," Vernon began, adjusting his glasses nervously. Wallace insisted the will be read immediately after the funeral service. "Just get on with it," Dalton said, already sitting in Dad's chair behind the massive oak desk. "We all know what it says." Vernon cleared his throat and began reading. "To my son Dalton, I leave my shares of Harrington Freight Lines, the family estate, my investment portfolio, and all personal effects not otherwise specified." Dalton's grin was so wide, I thought his face might crack. Finally recognized who the real heir was. $60 million in complete control. Sorry, little brother, but Dad knew who could handle the responsibility. "To my son Bryce," Vernon continued, his voice steadier now. "I leave the contents of Storage Unit 47B at Riverside Storage, paid in advance for 1 year." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dalton started laughing, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed off the office walls. "A storage unit? 20 years of loyalty and you get Dad's old junk. What's in there? His college yearbooks? Maybe some moth-eaten clothes? He was laughing so hard he had to wipe his eyes. God, that's perfect. The failure with a paycheck gets a room full of garbage. Vernon handed me a small brass key and a folded piece of paper. Dad's handwriting, shaky but clear. Check the storage unit. I'd been working at Harrington Freight Lines for 15 years, ever since I dropped out of college to help Dad when Mom got sick. While Dalton went to business school and came back with his MBA and designer suits, I learned the business from the ground up. I drove trucks through snowstorms in Montana, managed night shifts at the loading docks, handled route planning when our dispatcher quit without notice. My hands had calluses that Dalton's would never know. "You know what your problem is, Bryce?" Dalton would say during our Monday meetings, loud enough for the entire management team to hear. "You think small. That's why Dad keeps you in operations while I handle the real business." The conference room would go quiet whenever he started. 20 executives pretending to study their reports while my brother publicly humiliated me. Dad would sit at the head of the table, signing whatever Dalton put in front of him, never saying a word in my defense. Our company moved everything from furniture to medical supplies across 12 states. Dad built it from one truck in 1979 to a fleet of 200. Every driver knew me by name because I'd ridden with them, eaten at the same truck stops, helped them through breakdowns on lonely highways. Every dispatcher had my personal cell because I answered at 3 a.m. when a driver was stuck or a shipment was late. But to Dalton, I was just the failure with a paycheck. That phrase started 5 years ago when I suggested we invest in newer safety equipment for the fleet. Dalton had laughed during the board meeting, turning to our CFO and saying, "This is why I handle finances while my brother plays with his trucks. He wants to waste money on unnecessary upgrades." "What's next, Bryce? Massage chairs in the cabs?" "It's about keeping our drivers safe," I'd responded. "It's about profit margins, something the failure with a paycheck wouldn't understand." The name stuck. He used it in emails, in casual conversation, sometimes even in front of clients. The worst part was that everyone knew Dad heard it, and his silence felt like agreement. Our last family dinner before Dad's heart attack was at the old house, the one where Dalton and I grew up. Elena had made her famous pot roast, the one Dad always requested for his birthday. Piper was telling her grandfather about her science fair project on renewable energy when Dalton interrupted. "Speaking of energy, Dad, we need to discuss the expansion into automated trucking. The future is driverless vehicles." "What about our current drivers?" I asked. "Some of them have been with us for 20 years. "Dinosaurs," Dalton said, reaching for the wine. "Just like this obsession with personal relationships, Bryce doesn't understand expansion. He wants to keep playing with his trucks while I'm building an empire." Elena's knuckles were white as she gripped her fork. She knew how many 16-hour days I'd worked, how many holidays I'd missed to keep operations running smoothly while Dalton attended conferences in Vegas and Miami. "But Daddy knows every driver's kid's name," Piper spoke up, her voice brave but small. "Uncle Dalton doesn't even know his assistant's last name." Dalton's face darkened. "That's because I don't waste time on meaningless details. Leaders focus on the big picture, not whether Tommy the trucker's kid made honor roll." "Her name is Thompson," I said quietly, "and her daughter Grace just got a full scholarship to nursing school." "Case in point," Dalton smirked. "You're so busy playing friends with the help that you can't see the company's real potential." Dad finally spoke, but not to defend me. "Dalton's right about expansion. We need to think bigger." Those words hit harder than any of Dalton's insults. Helena found me later that night, sitting on the porch steps of my childhood home, staring at the stars Mom and I used to count when I couldn't sleep. "Why do you let them treat you this way?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Because someone has to actually run the company while Dalton plays CEO. The drivers need me. The routes need managing. If I leave, who ensures the medical supplies get to rural hospitals on time? Who makes sure our drivers get home for their kids' birthdays?" But what about your birthdays? What about Piper's soccer games you miss because Dalton schedules emergency meetings? I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I'd been asking myself the same question for years. Why did I stay? Why did I accept being called a failure when I knew the company's operations inside and out? Maybe because somewhere, deep down, I kept hoping Dad would finally see me. Really see me. Not the college dropout or Dalton's little brother, but the son who'd given everything to keep his dream alive. 3 days after Dad's heart attack, he was gone. The funeral was packed with drivers, customers, competitors. Everyone who'd known Wallace Harrington came to pay their respects. Men who'd driven millions of miles for our company stood in their best suits, tears running down weathered faces. Dalton gave a 40-minute eulogy about legacy and vision, wearing Dad's watch and his gold cufflinks like trophies of war. I spoke for 2 minutes about the man who taught me to change oil at age 7. The will reading happened that same afternoon in Dad's office, the one with the view of the entire truck yard. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows I could see drivers preparing for their routes, the diesel engines humming their familiar rhythm. Vernon Pike looked uncomfortable as he adjusted his reading glasses, the legal documents trembling slightly in his hands. To my son Dalton, I leave my shares of Harrington Freight Lines, the family estate, my investment portfolio, and all personal effects not otherwise specified. Dalton didn't even try to hide his smile. Finally recognized who the real heir was. Vernon continued, his voice growing quieter. To my son Bryce, I leave the contents of Storage Unit 47B at Riverside Storage, paid in advance for 1 year. A storage unit? Dalton laughed so hard he nearly choked on his own saliva. 20 years of loyalty and you get Dad's old junk? What's in there, his college yearbooks? Vernon handed me a small key and a piece of paper with Dad's shaky handwriting, probably written from his hospital bed. Check the storage unit. I'll need you to clear out your office by Friday, Dalton said, already settling into Dad's chair like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. I'm promoting Terrence to operations director. We need someone with vision, not someone who wastes time memorizing truck drivers' birthdays. Terrence doesn't know the difference between a reefer unit and a flatbed, I said. He knows how to read a profit margin, that's all that matters. Dalton was already pulling files from Dad's desk, tossing aside photos of our family like they were trash. Oh, and Bryce? Your company credit cards are canceled effective immediately. Can't have former employees accessing company funds. Former employees? I'm not fired, I'm your brother. You're the failure with a paycheck, and now you don't even have that. Consider this your opportunity to finally grow up and find your own way. Elena was furious on the drive home. Her face was flushed red, and she gripped the dashboard like she wanted to tear it apart. 20 years, Bryce. You gave him 20 years of your life. You missed Piper's recitals, our anniversaries, your own birthdays, all for that company. Maybe there's something Dad wanted me to have, I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. Your brother just stole $60 million from you, and the house you grew up in, the house where your mother taught you to ride a bike. She was right. The 2-story colonial where Mom had planted roses, where Dad had built us a treehouse, where I'd carved my initials in the basement wall, it all belonged to Dalton now. Even Mom's piano, the one she played every Sunday morning, was his to sell or trash as he pleased. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those times Dad watched Dalton humiliate me. All those moments he could have spoken up but didn't. The board meetings where Dalton called me worthless. The family dinners where he mocked my dedication to our drivers. The public events where he introduced Dalton as my successor and me as my other son. Why would he leave me anything at all? Why not just write me out completely? I found myself in Piper's room at midnight, watching her sleep. She had school in the morning, her junior year of high school, and I wondered how I'd pay for her college now. Dalton had made sure I had no severance, no pension, nothing. Can't sleep? Elena whispered from the doorway. I keep thinking about what Dad used to say. Everything happens for a reason, Bryce. Sometimes you just can't see the reason yet. Your father said a lot of things, like when he promised you'd be partners with Dalton someday. Maybe the storage unit has family photos or something Mom wanted me to have. Elena walked over and took my hand. Whatever's in there, we'll face it together. We've built a life without their money before. We can do it again. But as I stood there in my daughter's room, watching her dream peacefully, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dad's note meant something more. 4 words. Check the storage unit. It was too specific, too deliberate for a man who never wasted words. At 2 a.m., I drove to Riverside Storage. It was one of those 24-hour places on the outskirts of town, near our first warehouse. The security guard nodded as I passed, probably used to people dealing with their grief in the middle of the night. Unit 47B was in the back corner, covered in dust and spider webs that looked like they'd been there for years. The lock was new, though. Dad must have been here recently, maybe even days before his heart attack. Inside, the unit looked like a museum of our company's history. Old filing cabinets lined one wall, their green paint chipped and fading. Boxes of photographs were stacked in neat rows, each labeled with years going back to 1979. Dad's first delivery log sat on a wooden crate, the pages yellowed but the handwriting still clear. I almost turned to leave when I noticed something odd, fresh fingerprints on one dusty cabinet, like someone had opened it recently. Inside the top drawer was a manila envelope with my name written in Dad's careful script. Bryce, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Dalton has taken everything. That was always the plan. My hands shook as I kept reading. The storage unit suddenly felt too small, too quiet, like the whole world had shrunk to just me and these words. Your brother is brilliant at business, but blind to people. I've been watching him for years. The shortcuts he takes, the under-the-table deals he thinks I don't know about, the safety violations he covers up to save money. I have everything documented here, but more importantly, I've been building something else. Behind the cabinet was a wall of banker's boxes I hadn't noticed before, each labeled with a year from 2014 to 2024. My heart pounded as I pulled down the box marked 2015, contracts, deeds, bank statements, but not for Harrington Freight Lines. B&W Logistics LLC appeared on every document. B for Bryce, W for Wallace. I sank to the concrete floor, surrounded by papers that didn't make sense. How could there be another company? How could I not know about it? Dad's letter explained everything. 10 years ago, I started a shadow company with you as the silent partner. Every contract Dalton rejected as too small, every client he dismissed as not worth our time, I picked up under B&W. You know why I kept you in operations, because that's where the real relationships are built. While Dalton was having 3 martini lunches with investors, you were helping our drivers' families, learning our customers' needs, understanding what really makes a trucking company work. I opened box after box, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle. Contracts with small medical suppliers who needed reliable delivery to rural hospitals. Agreements with local manufacturers Dalton had called Mom and Pop worthless. Routes serving communities that weren't profitable enough for my brother's spreadsheets, but were lifelines for the people living there. Remember Thompson's daughter Grace, the one who just got into nursing school? B&W paid for her application fees. Remember when Rodriguez's wife needed cancer treatment? B&W made sure he had a route that got him home every night. Every driver Dalton pushed out, every good person your brother's policies hurt, they found a home with us. The 2020 box contained employee records. I recognized name after name. Drivers who'd supposedly quit, dispatchers who'd found better opportunities, mechanics who'd retired early. They were all working for B&W Logistics. I let Dalton think they were leaving because they were weak. He never questioned it because it fit his narrative that only the ruthless survive. Meanwhile, I was building you an army of the most loyal employees in the industry. The 2023 box held property deeds, warehouses in 6 states, all strategically located near Harrington facilities. Truck purchases, all late-model vehicles with the safety equipment I'd begged Dalton to buy. Maintenance facilities with state-of-the-art equipment. Every time Dalton bragged about cutting costs, I invested that money in B&W. Every bonus he denied to drivers, I matched it from B&W's accounts. You've been signing documents for me as Operations Director of Harrington, but I've also been filing paperwork with you as President of B&W. It's all legal, all documented, all waiting for you. The final box, labeled 2024, was different. It contained just 3 items: a financial statement, a business card, and a set of keys. The financial statement showed B&W Logistics was worth $85 million. The business card read, James Pike, Acting CEO, B&W Logistics, with an address 3 blocks away. The keys had a note attached. Your office is waiting. My phone buzzed. A text from Vernon Pike. Your father said you'd come tonight. James is waiting at the B&W warehouse on Riverside. Your drivers want to meet their real boss. The warehouse was 3 blocks away, a massive modern facility that dwarfed anything Harrington Freight Lines owned. As I pulled up, I saw familiar faces everywhere. Dozens of drivers and dispatchers who'd quit over the years stood in the loading bay, their faces lit by industrial lights. Rodriguez, who Dalton fired for taking 3 days off when his son was born. McKenna, who left after Dalton called her too emotional for management. Thompson, whose daughter Grace was heading to nursing school. About time, boss, Rodriguez grinned, stepping forward to shake my hand. We've been waiting for you. James Pike, Vernon's son, emerged from the group. He was younger than me, maybe 30, with the same careful precision as his father. Your father hired me 5 years ago to run daily operations while we waited for this moment. He said you'd come tonight right after finding the storage unit. How many people know about this? I asked, still trying to process the sight of 60 employees I thought were gone forever. Everyone here. Your father handpicked each person. Every time Dalton drove out someone with integrity, your father recruited them for B&W. James handed me a thick folder. Your father's final acquisition. Closed yesterday, 2 days before he died. Inside were purchase agreements for 3 of Harrington Freight's biggest competitors: Mercy Transport, Clearwater Shipping, and Atlas Freight Systems. The combined value was staggering. He bought our competition? You bought them, James corrected. Your signature is on everything, perfectly legal. Your father set it up through holding companies years ago. The moment Dalton took over Harrington, these 3 companies would suddenly merge under B&W Logistics. My phone rang. Dalton's name flashed on the screen. What did you do? He screamed before I could even say hello. 53 drivers just quit. They walked off their routes mid-shift. Morrison Foods, Baxter Medical, even Sterling Manufacturing, they're all canceling contracts. I didn't do anything, I said, watching Rodriguez coordinate with our dispatchers on brand new tablets. You did this to yourself. You're nobody. You're the failure with a paycheck. You can't do this to me. Actually, I haven't taken a paycheck from Harrington in 2 years. Dad moved me to B&W's payroll in 2022. You never noticed because you never actually looked at the operational budgets, just the bottom line. The line went silent for a moment. Then Dalton's voice came back, lower, more dangerous. I'll sue you. I'll take everything. With what grounds? Every contract that's leaving signed termination clauses you approved. Remember when you insisted on 30-day exit options to give us flexibility? That works both ways. Thompson walked over and handed me keys to a truck. Not a Harrington truck, but a B&W one. Brand new, state-of-the-art, with Safety First emblazoned on the side along with our logo. 2 interlocked wheels forming an infinity symbol. Your father designed that himself, she said. Said transportation isn't about moving things, it's about connecting lives, and that never ends. Behind her, the warehouse bustled with activity. Drivers were conducting safety checks on vehicles that had every upgrade I'd ever recommended. Dispatchers worked at ergonomic stations with the latest routing software. The break room I could see through the glass windows wasn't a cramped corner with vending machines, but a full kitchen with a chef preparing hot meals. "This is what I wanted Harrington to be," I said quietly. "This is what it should have been," McKenna said, joining us. "Your father knew Dalton would destroy everything eventually, so he built something better, something Dalton couldn't touch because he'd never think to look for it." James pulled out another document. "There's more. Every major client who left Harrington tonight received proposals from B&W weeks ago, contingent on a specific triggering event, Dalton taking full control. Your father knew your brother's first moves would be cutting driver benefits and raising prices. Our proposals undercut Harrington by 15% while offering better service. He planned all of this for 5 years. He said Dalton needed to inherit the kingdom to learn it was built on sand. You needed to inherit the foundation to build something real." My phone buzzed with texts from Dalton, each one more frantic than the last. Major clients defecting, drivers abandoning trucks at rest stops, the insurance company threatening to cancel coverage due to safety violations they'd suddenly discovered, violations Dad had documented but never reported. "Your father's final instruction," James said, handing me an envelope marked "Open after Dalton calls 5 times. Inside was a single line. "Now he's ready to learn. Offer him a job, entry level, second chances matter." I looked around the warehouse at the family we'd built, the company that existed because we'd refused to abandon our values. Dad hadn't abandoned me. He'd been preparing me for this moment all along. 6 months later, Harrington Freight Lines filed for bankruptcy. Dalton had over-leveraged everything, assuming the contracts would never leave. Without the drivers who actually knew the routes, without the relationships I'd spent 15 years building, he had nothing but trucks and debt. The bank foreclosed on the family estate. The investors pulled out. Even the Rolex he'd taken from Dad's wrist ended up in a pawnshop window downtown. He showed up at my office on a Tuesday morning. Not the cramped operations office at Harrington, but my real office at B&W headquarters, a converted warehouse that hummed with purpose and pride. He looked older than his 42 years, his expensive suit replaced with khakis and a polo shirt, his confident swagger reduced to hesitant steps. "You planned this," he said, slumping into the chair across from my desk. "Dad planned this. He knew you'd take everything, so he made sure everything wasn't worth taking. Why didn't he just give it to you directly?" I pulled out Dad's final letter, the part I'd never shared with anyone except Elena. "Dalton needs to fail on his own terms. It's the only way he'll learn. When he comes to you broken, offer him what I never could, a chance to start over from the bottom. He's still my son. He's still your brother." "I need a job," Dalton whispered, the words clearly costing him everything. "I have an opening in dispatch, entry level. You'll report to Rodriguez." He stared at me, his pride fighting his desperation. "Rodriguez? The driver I fired?" "The dispatcher who manages our Southwest routes. He's excellent at training new people. Patient, understanding. Everything a good teacher should be." "Everyone deserves a second chance," I said. "Even failures with paychecks." For the first time in our adult lives, Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "I called you that for years. And now you understand how it feels. But here's what Dad knew that you're about to learn. Everyone fails. The difference is what you build from that failure." Piper was right that night at our last family dinner. I did know every driver's kid's name. That's what Dad understood, and Dalton never did. Business isn't about numbers or empire building, it's about people. It's about Thompson working extra shifts to put her daughter through nursing school. It's about Rodriguez getting home to tuck his kids into bed. It's about McKenna having the chance to show her leadership skills despite not having an MBA. The storage unit is still paid up for another 6 months. I go there sometimes, sitting among Dad's old files, reading his notes from over the years. One stands out, written the day Dalton called me a failure in front of the entire board. Bryce stayed late to help driver Thompson fix his daughter's wheelchair ramp. Dalton stayed late to find legal ways to cut benefits. One son builds empires, the other builds loyalty. Time will tell which matters more. Dad knew exactly what he was doing, keeping me in operations, letting Dalton think he'd won. Every insult, every humiliation, Dad was letting his oldest son reveal exactly who he was while secretly documenting everything for the moment of truth. Last week, Elena and I drove past the old Harrington facility. It's a shopping center now, a chain of stores that will probably close within 5 years. But 3 blocks down, the B&W Logistics sign lights up the skyline. Our drivers make 30% more than industry standard. Our safety record is impeccable, and every single employee knows they matter. "You know what your problem is, Bryce?" Elena asked, mimicking Dalton's old tone as we stood looking at our company. "What's that?" "You think about people first. That's why your father made you the real heir while your brother got the illusion." She was right. Dalton inherited what he thought was everything. I inherited what actually mattered: the relationships, the trust, the knowledge that every mile driven and every package delivered represents someone's livelihood, someone's family, someone's future. The note is framed in my office now, those 4 words in Dad's shaky handwriting. "Check the storage unit." Below it, I added my own. "Legacy isn't what you take, it's what you build." Dalton starts his training tomorrow. Rodriguez says he's been studying route maps all week, actually asking questions about the drivers' families. Maybe there's hope for him yet. Dad believed there was. And if I've learned anything from this journey, it's that Wallace Harrington was usually right about the things that mattered. Sometimes the biggest gifts come in the smallest packages. Sometimes what looks like nothing is actually everything. And sometimes you have to lose what you thought you wanted to find what you actually need. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that success isn't always what it seems. Comment below with your own experiences of unexpected blessings or family business dynamics. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the people who stand with us. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't defined by those who try to diminish you, but by the integrity you maintain when no one's watching.